So far we have talked about the purpose of the literature review. So we've talked about that, but the literature review, the first part of it is really going to be where you talk about your use of theory and the theoretical framework. And this is probably going to be one of those situations where it's similar to the research problem and to the research questions, where it's going to feel a little abstract, and I'm going to try and give you some roadmaps and some processes to make it more concrete. So, the use of theory by research approach is very specific. In quantitative research, we use the theory to test the hypothesis, such as I'm looking at leadership styles theory to predict how transformational versus transactional leadership impacts teacher retention. So notice that the actual research question is going to be, how does transformational versus transactional leadership predict teacher retention, right? So that would be how I do it with the predict word. What you don't see in that research question is, how are you defining transformational and transactional leadership? Those terms are defined in the leadership styles theory. That's where those terms. So it's almost like you have to walk it back and figure out what theory encompasses what I'm trying to research. In qualitative research, you kind of use theory like it's a pair of glasses. So if I'm a constructivist and I want to explore how students build knowledge, then that's my theory, because I'm exploring, hello qualitative, and I'm exploring how students build their knowledge. And constructivism says that they construct their knowledge in a scaffolded experience. If I'm in mixed methods, it's actually kind of interesting because, like I said, your mixed methods, you tend to be like 60-40, 70-30. So you're blending them, but never equally. And in this case, I'm going to combine those. And so I might be testing the efficacy of a PLC, and I'm looking at developing new insights, but all of that falls under professional learning community theory. So you have to look at your variables. You have to look at what are the definitions of those variables and then what theory defines them. So the use of theory is going to vary by your approach, but no matter what, it's going to form the basis of what you're looking at. It's almost like your street credit. So if I'm looking at a study examining the impact of servant leadership on school culture, I might choose mixed methods, which means I'm going to have a blended approach to theory. This means that as I'm testing my hypothesis that schools led by servant leaders have higher teacher satisfaction, while conducting interviews with staff to uncover how servant leadership manifests in day-to-day interactions, I'm still looking at leadership theory. What leadership theory talks about servant leadership. That's the theory that's driving here. And so you've kind of got to walk it back from that really specific place. You're going to look at your research questions. You're going to look at your variables. You're going to walk backwards from those to looking at the relevant theory. So for example, if you're studying teacher motivation, what theories talk about teacher motivation? Then you're going to look them up. There's more than one. And you're going to figure out which one fits your study and your research questions the best. There's your theory. Your theory should come at the start of your proposal in the lit review, and it's probably also in your chapter 1 checklist. But in the lit review, you have to talk about your theory. You've got to explain it. You have to use primary sources. You're going to have to talk about how it comes to play in your research questions, hypothesis, and design. If you are qualitative, it would be in your exploration and the study design. Then you need to explain and establish why it's relevant. So why is this theory the best one? So why is transformation leadership theory important if I'm doing a study on different leadership types? How does it inform and frame the investigation of leadership effectiveness in schools? You're going to look at other studies that have utilized that theory. You're going to go in, you're going to use the keyword, you're going to type in the theory, and and you're going to see who else used it and how is it related to your work. Then you're going to create your diagram. This is a required part of your dissertation. Go into Canva and work with some diagrams and create a visual model that explains the theory. So if I am looking at transformational leadership theory, then show me the different leadership styles. So in the middle, you could have transformational leadership theory, and you could have all of the offshoots of that are leadership styles. And you could have offshoots of that connect to student achievement. You're going to have to make an image. You're going to have to diagram it. You're going to have to do that in this class. I need to see a diagram. Then you're going to structure your study around the theory and make sure that your framework aligns to that theory. So if you're doing a theory that is quantitatively driven and you're doing a qualitative study, that is not going to work. You're going to have to make sure that the premise of those theories can be studied the way that you want to study them. And then you're going to take off and you're going to explore all the rest of your research questions, all the rest of your topics, everything else, and you're going to end by revisiting the theory in your lit review. So we have an example that we're going to look at in class, the research example, and we're also going to do some activities. So this is kind of the intermission where I'm going to walk through that. In quantitative research, so let's look a little bit deeper at that. Theory is used to make predictions about relationships between variables. So like, for instance, Bloom's taxonomy could be used to predict, can a student do higher order questioning? So Bloom's taxonomy tells us how to achieve higher order thinking. So if I am studying something that wants to achieve higher order thinking and Bloom's tells me how to do it, ta-da, there's my theory. If I'm wanting to look at leadership, I could look at path goal theory because in leadership research, it's used to predict how different leadership behaviors affect teacher performance. There is a scale to these. Bloom's has levels. Path goal leadership theory has levels. It talks about different behaviors and how those behaviors affect teacher performance. We do have 3 different types of theories. We have micro, meso, and macro. So these are specific interactions. If you are doing things that involve teacher feedback, that's kind of a very hyper-focused theory. So you're looking for something that encompasses teacher feedback. If you're looking at a broader system called organizational climate theory, that's broad, but it's still kind of specific because it's climate. And then systems leadership is just super broad. When we are working on a dissertation, we want to live between micro and meso. We want to be specific as we can be with those 2 things, okay? Because again, quantitative, we're measuring variables. They're specific variables. They have clear definitions. We need to be somewhere between those 2 when we're looking at different types of theories. The types of theories in quantitative research starts by looking at your variables. What is your independent and dependent variable? What theories talk about those things? So if you're quantitative, your theory is kind of easy to find because if I'm looking at leadership styles as my independent variable, and then I'm looking at the outcome of that leadership style, like teacher retention, I'm looking for theories that are about leadership and theories that are about teacher retention. I can have more than one theory in my dissertation because I have 2 different variables. So that's the key piece too, is that you can blend theories as well. If I'm living in the qualitative world, my theory is like my glasses. We use existing theories to explore something that's happening, but it gives us a framework for how to explore it. So we have questionnaires. In qualitative research, there are existing questionnaires that have been tested time and time again. If you're using one of those questionnaires, chances are that questionnaire was developed by somebody who also developed a theory. Ta-da, there you go. In qualitative, though, there is this kind of idea that sometimes quantitative research leads to the development of a new theory, which is not what we're doing in dissertations. And then sometimes it's a flexible and evolving theory. So sometimes your theory is a little bit flexible because as you study it, you might say, actually, I'm not sure as I'm studying this based on the interview responses that I'm getting, if this theory is the best one to represent what I'm exploring now that I'm actually doing the exploring. So in qualitative, you may kind of go back. You may have to kind of go back and adjust your theory. You may have to just adjust your theory diagram, but it is a more flexible and fluid situation. So in educational research, constructivist learning theory could be used to explore how students are constructing their knowledge in group work and inquiry-based learning. If I'm asking students their questions about their process that they learn in, and I'm using a questionnaire that talks about basically scaffolding and how I get from point A to point B by building on a foundation, that's constructivist learning theory. And then I've got some other examples that, for instance, in critical race theory, if that's driving things and I'm looking at educational policies in my dissertation and I'm exploring those policies and how they impact minority students, that's critical race theory. If I'm looking at leadership qualitative research and I'm looking at exploring how school leaders inspire and motivate teachers based on their leadership style, transformational leadership theory would be where I'm going. So in quantitative, we think about it like our independent and our dependent variable, but in qualitative, it's what are you exploring? Like just really kind of sit with that. What am I trying to explore? And what theory does that fit under? In mixed methods, again, we're typically 60-40, 70-30, so you're just going to pull in different components of each. So you're going to look at your quantitative components and you're going to look at your variables and say, what theory encompasses these variables? You're going to look at your qualitative section and you're going to say, what am I exploring? What theory encompasses what I'm exploring here? There you go. There is a very big difference in your worldview versus your theory. So you can have a constructivist worldview, which typically means that you're aligned to a constructivist theory, but not necessarily always. So it's really important that a worldview is your underlying beliefs and values about something. It's your view of the world and how it works. In my worldview, I believe that we all learn from layers. I think that we all learn from layers, and I think we all learn from doing. You're going to tell me that pot is hot, and I'm going to touch it. And until I touch that pot and I make that critical mistake, I'm not really going to understand that the pot is hot. So in my worldview, that's how I perceive learning as a whole for everyone. That then colors things that I do to apply the theory so that I am applying it within my study. So when I'm writing my research questions, when I'm writing my instrument, when I'm looking at what I'm studying, I'm scaffolding the learner where I'm letting them make mistakes. I am letting them touch the pot all day long, and I'm not making it worth a whole lot of points because that way when you touch the pot, you make your critical error, you learn from it, you get feedback from your instructor, and you move on. Worldview, theory, and play. And you've got to make sure that you're distinguishing between those two, and really one is in the doing and one is in the thinking. So a constructivist worldview might lead you to study how students build knowledge, because constructivism is all about how you build knowledge. And in constructivism, we build it hands-on, touch the pot that's hot. We ask questions. We learn that, oh, that's wrong, so nope, that's not right. But then in the doing, I could be looking at a social constructivist theory, such as looking at how we learn about social cues and social environments from making those mistakes, from learning that I shouldn't say this in public, from asking my parents questions and realizing that that was an inappropriate behavior. So just because your worldview is constructivist doesn't mean that your theory is constructivist. There's lots of theories that are constructivist by design. In the practical application of theory, quantitative, we have a visual model that shows us how things interact. So when I'm talking about that graphic, I need to see how your variables are interacting with that within that theory. In qualitative, you kind of have to determine, is the theory guiding you? So are you using a questionnaire that's associated with the theory? Or are you doing something different where the theory might emerge and change as you're doing the exploration? So then you would have to go back and look at your graphic and adjust it, and go back and look at your theory section in your lit review and adjust it. If you're mixed methods, you got to figure out where you live. What's your distribution? Are you 60-40? Are you 70-30? And which one are you majority towards? That's going to be how you figure it out, is whichever one is the leading percentage, that's the convention you're going to follow. Now, the next component is where, again, we've had some, I can't touch it, I can't see it, I can't feel it. Oh, Dr. Robinson's a constructivist. Yet again, look at that. Theory and theoretical frameworks are often hard for students to conceptualize. So a theory is broad. It's a conceptual explanation. It's a prediction of how people do something. Like, I can't actually see your brain and how it works. But if I'm a constructivist, I'm predicting that the way your brain works is you make a mistake, you learn from it, it's memorable, you move on. So you had to make the mistake, so you're a hands-on learner. It gives you a way that you understand something between two things. So I understand how they learn and how they learn from being able to make mistakes or be hands-on. I use make mistakes more often than being hands-on. So a theory is all about how we understand the world and interact with the world. It's not specific to your study. It's absolutely not specific. It's super broad. It's like that research problem. It's a big societal thing. It's not specific. Whereas a theoretical framework is the backbone of what you're doing. It is specific. You are following a systematic, structured, and grounded approach, and that is your framework. You cannot finalize how you will study your research problem if you don't have a framework. It doesn't retrofit. So while we do need to look at our methodology and our approach, simultaneously, we have to think about our framework. You cannot retrofit a framework after you have done the actual methodology design. This has to come first. And the theoretical framework, it's a guide for forming your research questions and structuring them. Now, why didn't I show you this last week? You weren't ready for this last week, okay? Your research questions are in draft form for the rest of this class. We're going to layer, again, Dr. Robinson believes we learn in layers. So we're going to layer, and every layer, we're going to look at our research questions and adjust them. And they're going to be fluid for that reason. It should also guide your data collection, your analysis, and your interpretation. So where theory is abstract and conceptual, the theoretical framework is practical and specific to your study. It explains why you took the steps that you took. So in class, we're going to walk through this constructivist theory. I've attached this in the announcements as well. So take a minute to review that, but we are going to work on doing an example in class together in breakouts, and we're going to talk through that constructivist theory piece itself. And so thank you for watching this before we come to class. You're now going to be adequately prepared to talk about these big topics.